When the website hitmanforhire.net was set up, everybody assumed it was a joke. Now, like any other business, it boasted that it carried out its work cleanly and efficiently, but in this case, its work was killing people. The site also included an employment section where would-be assassins could sign up and join in an international hitman network. Anne Royston was a 23-year-old mortgage broker based in Los Angeles, and she contacted the FBI to tell them a really bizarre story. She said that she had been approached at her office by a man who was about middle-aged with a strange accent and a mustache. The man told her that he had been paid a deposit of $17,000 to carry out a hit on her life. Now, he also showed her a printout of an email, and that read, "I want her done by a shot to the head." That email was sent by a woman by the name of Marissa Marks. Marissa Marks was the ex-girlfriend of Royston's then boyfriend, and she viewed Anne Royston as a love rival and she wanted to get rid of her. Anne Royston told the FBI that the hitman had warned her that there was a contract on her life, but the hitman told her that she reminded him of his own daughter and that he didn't want to carry out the hit. So instead he came up with a proposal. He suggested that Anne Royston should pay him the balance of the contract, which was about $20,000, and that in return he would spare her life. Agent Sotelo directed Anne Royston to get into contact with the hitman, and over the next few days they monitored phone calls between the two. And then all of a sudden the communication ceased. The FBI assumed that the hitman must have absconded. Now, as it turned out, he had left the US, but unfortunately for him, he hadn't gone to a country that had no extradition treaty with the US. Instead, he had flown all the way across the Atlantic to the west of Ireland, where he was planning to carry out another hit.
A man and a woman accused of conspiring to murder the woman's former partner and his two sons went on trial today. Sharon Collins allegedly hired a hitman to carry out the killings.
The prosecution say that Sharon Collins from Ennis was eager to marry her partner of several years, Pat Howard, a widower and successful Clare businessman. The court heard that Mr. Howard did not want this, as he intended his property business based in Ennis to go to his two sons, Robert and Niall. Miss Collins got a proxy marriage certificate over the internet, and it's alleged that she then used the net to search for assassins for hire and came across an Egyptian man, Essam Eid. A former poker dealer, he lived in Las Vegas with his wife and ex-wife. The prosecution alleges Miss Collins set up an email account using the alias Lying Eyes and contacted Mr. Eid, who used the name Tony Luciano, through his Yahoo address, Hitman for Hire. Hitman for Hire replied to Lying Eyes, saying the price for a contract killing was $50,000, but because it would be three birds with one stone, the price was $90,000.
Well, Sharon Coote, as she was born, was one of three sisters who grew up on the Kilrush Road in an estate there. She came from a broken home, and after school she went to the NIHE, as it was then, to study computers.
She was just 19 when she married Noel Collins, and they had two children, Gary and David. And the marriage didn't last. The couple separated, and later on they divorced.
So she was a separated single mum, kind of grafting, and always trying to make a quick few quid in terms of investing in pyramid schemes and working part-time jobs where she could.
She worked for a time as an aerobics instructor. She also went into the furniture business and worked for a time in a furniture shop. And it was there that she met PJ Howard in 1998.
She had always wanted to be a writer, and when she wrote one of her letters to the DPP, James Hamilton, she described it in very fanciful terms. She said that when he walked through the door, it was almost like a recollection. That was how she described it. In other words, that they were meant to be.
And within a few months, she moved in with PJ in his plush home, Ballybeg House, on the outskirts of Ennis. And they lived there for some time, right up until her arrest, and then later on her trial at the Four Courts in Dublin. PJ
Howard was also from Ennis, but unlike Sharon, he came from the other end of the spectrum in that his father had set up a car dealership in the 50s with a man called Denny Downs. And so by the time PJ was heading up the family firm, he took it into property.
It's estimated that his wealth stands at about 60 million. He has a string of properties throughout Clare. He owns a palatial house not far outside Ennis. He also has a penthouse apartment on the Costa del Sol and a boat, no mortgages to speak of. He also runs the Downs and Howard property company in Ennis, and he has two sons, Robert and Niall, who work with him in the business. He's a very shy type of man. He's not a man who courts publicity, and certainly during the trial of Sharon Collins, he did everything he could to keep away from the public eye and to keep out of view.
So he came from the complete other side of the tracks in that he was also separated from his wife, and he also had two sons like Sharon around the same age. But unlike Sharon, he was living the high life.
When Sharon and PJ had been together for a number of years, PJ's former wife died. Now, they had been legally separated and she passed away in 2003. So Sharon Collins felt that this paved the way for her to get married to PJ.
And so he agreed to marry her. And in 2004, Sharon told friends and family that they were engaged. And then PJ had a meeting with his solicitor, and he found out that a prenup had no standing in Irish law. And so he realised that Sharon, if he married her, would become his next of kin, and that his sons wouldn't be entitled to his fortune.
He and Sharon signed a legal document stating that they were not married and they never would marry. And in 2005, PJ's eldest son, Robert, was given a copy of this, confirming that nothing was going to happen to his inheritance.
They didn't marry. They went to Sorrento in Italy, and while they declared their undying love for each other and expressed vows to each other, they didn't get married. They came home, they had a big party for friends, but there was no marriage.
Even after this, Sharon went around telling an awful lot of her friends that she was married to PJ. Now, he later said he was aware of this, that he didn't have a problem with it because they both privately knew the score. But what he didn't know at the time was that Sharon decided that even this pretense wasn't enough for her. So she did a spot of internet shopping. She went onto a website called proxymarriages.com, and she paid €1,000 to buy a marriage certificate, a proxy marriage certificate from a company in Mexico. Now, whether that would have stood up to legal scrutiny remains to be seen, but it was certainly enough for the passport office here in Ireland. And when Sharon handed in this document, she was given a new passport in the name of Sharon Howard. And that really was all the groundwork that she needed to do to set up a situation whereby she appeared to be legally PJ's spouse.
The evidence will always suggest that PJ Howard treated Sharon very well, and that they had enjoyed a great time together, living the high life, posh parties in Dromoland Castle, several holidays over in Spain where he has an apartment and a boat, and they had nothing but the best.
They enjoyed a lot of foreign holidays together, and he had a lovely lakeside home outside Ennis, which she enjoyed. So she really had quite a lavish lifestyle, and certainly was treated very, very well by PJ on the outside.
However, from listening to Sharon Collins through email correspondence she sent to the Jerry Ryan Show and to FM, she would suggest that it mightn't have been as wonderful as all of that.
She made a series of accusations about PJ Howard. She claimed that he frequented transvestites, that he brought her to swingers clubs while they were in Spain, and that he had pressured her to work as a prostitute, but that she refused.
Plot to hire a hitman and cover her tracks afterwards, but her best-laid plans fell apart.
Gardaí seized her computer several months later, and they came across parts of the email that she had sent to the Jerry Ryan show. Now, as it happened, the email was never actually read out, but such was the consternation surrounding it that it was enough for Jerry Ryan and his series producer to be called into the courthouse in July 2008 to testify and to say that they had not received such an email. Now, it had actually gone through, had gone into the system, had arrived in 2FM, but as Jerry Ryan said at the time, they received 2,000 emails a month, and this one obviously got lost somewhere in the ether.
Greed was very much at the centre of this case. Sharon Collins wanted to get her hands on PJ Howard's money. During their relationship together, he had given her money on a regular basis. He had employed her as a part-time receptionist, but she wasn't happy with that. She wanted everything. She was aware of how much money he was worth and how much his business was worth.
PJ was not a very healthy man. He did have some health problems, but Sharon Collins wasn't going to wait around for something to happen to him. She thought she needed to put a plan in motion to get rid of him. Now, killing PJ would have been one thing, but there was still the thorny issue of his two sons, both of whom stood to inherit his wealth.
All the evidence would suggest that Sharon got on very well with PJ's two sons. Their mother had passed on, and she had been very close to both Robert and Niall in the aftermath of that.
They certainly looked to have a great relationship, and they could never have imagined that behind the smiling face of their father's partner was a woman who was actually setting out a plot to kill them. The entire complex operation involving a hitman began on the 2nd of August 2006. Sharon Collins went online and set up an email address. She chose the name lyingeyes98@yahoo.com, and it was an interesting choice of name given that it reflected the Eagles song, the famous song where a young, beautiful woman is married to an old man and cheats on him.
She also had 98 on it, which was the year that she met PJ.
At the same time, she also began a number of internet searches looking for a hitman. She also began looking for details online about inheritance rights, so she was really setting up, trying to find as much information as she possibly could in advance of her plan. She stumbled upon a website called hitman.us, but this turned out to be a t-shirt website, so second time lucky she came across Hitman for Hire.
Sharon Collins went on the internet in August 2006 and carried out a number of searches for hitman, hire hitman, how to kill your partner, etc. And she got in contact with the website Hitman for Hire.
It was almost comical, the cartoon figure that flashed up, sort of a mobster in a trilby and a trench coat with a submachine gun under his arm.
Anyone who looked at this website would have thought it was a spoof, but Sharon Collins didn't think so. So she got in contact with the man behind the site, who called himself Tony Luciano. Now, it was a great Italian-sounding alias and something that would fit in very well with The Sopranos or an equally entertaining TV show. But Tony Luciano was, in fact, an Egyptian poker dealer called Essam Eid.
Essam Eid was a professional poker dealer who was working in the Bellagio in Las Vegas.
He was about as far removed from an Italian hitman as you could possibly get.
He lived there with two wives, his first wife Lisa Eid and then his second wife Teresa Engel.
He had a very strange setup. He was under a lot of financial pressure in terms of his mortgage. He was a very dangerous character. Not only did she Google the word hitman, but she also actually sent the man she was trying to contract to kill, PJ and his two sons, emails in which she stated she hoped, they'd have to get rid of the computers, and she knew that the memory could never be completely erased. And yet she continued to plot openly, if you like, on her work computer, on the computer in PJ's house and on a laptop. And so, although she maintained she was innocent and claimed that she'd been set up, how anybody else who had set her up would have had the same interests, so that they would have gone into her email and deleted her email conveniently, as the state barrister put it, or looked up Tesco diets. She hadn't fathomed all that into her plan.
Over the course of about 2 weeks, they exchanged several emails. She explained that she wanted to get rid of her husband and that the 2 sons would have to be collateral damage, that they'd have to be gotten out of the way as well. Sharon was very organised and very methodical. She gave him in-depth directions and details. The directions were good enough to show him where Robert and Niall Howard lived, just outside Ennis. She also gave him details of PJ Howard's house.
Contact between them progressed to phone calls. Not only did they discuss money and plot exactly how the murders would take place. She wanted the boys poisoned in a pub where they drank, the Greyhound Bar. Sharon was very specific about how PJ should die. She wanted him to make it look like he committed suicide, because she felt 3 murders would be too, 3 deaths in the same family would be too suspicious. She joked in one of the emails that maybe the news that his 2 sons were dead would be enough to kill him because his heart was so bad. So that just gives you an indication of the callousness of the woman.
When Sharon Collins was giving Essam Eid all the detail that he needed to carry out the hits, she also sent him some photographs. One of them was a picture of her with PJ Howard, and she wrote beside the picture, which she sent to Essam Eid, "You'll be able to recognise my husband here, and I'm the devil in the red dress." Essam Eid wasn't a very competent hitman, so he, like most amateurs, he went online and tried a few search engines to come up with the most effective ways of killing people. One of the more unusual things that he came across was how to make a weapon out of toilet parts. But he eventually stumbled on the idea of ricin poisoning on the basis that it was relatively easy to make and would cause a very quick death. Essam Eid had a price for each head. He said that the going rate for a killing was $50,000, and as Sharon wanted 3 people killed, that should have been a bill of $150,000. But the entrepreneurial Mr. Eid decided that he would do a discount, and he offered to do the 3 killings for the sum of $90,000. Now, he demanded a down payment, so Sharon sent €15,000 to his address at Camden Cove in Las Vegas.
She withdrew that from various accounts, the credit union bank accounts that she had, and she sent that as a down payment to Essam Eid's home address in Las Vegas.
The problem with FedExing money is that every step of it is tracked, so that money had to have come from Sharon.
When her trail was traced by the Gardaí, they were able to see that she had later gone online and tracked this package to make sure that it had arrived.
That sort of sealed the deal, if you like, for the state's case, in that not only did she conspire to murder him, but she paid for it to happen. She wanted it to happen. The deal was done in her own mind.
When Essam Eid received the down payment from Sharon Collins, he immediately went online, ordered some castor beans, and set about collecting all of the ingredients that he needed to make ricin, which is one of the deadliest poisons in the world.
Ricin is a natural material. It comes from the plant that's used to make castor oil. This plant's seeds are called castor beans, and those beans are grown on a large scale throughout the tropics. The ricin is an extremely toxic material. It's much more deadly than cyanide or other substances like strychnine. If it goes directly into the bloodstream, then only a very tiny amount is required. something of the order of 1 grain of salt. That amount of material is sufficient to kill an adult human. But this material is quite difficult to detect, and often the poison cannot be identified in time to treat the patient. And in many cases, it's possible, and in some cases at least, people have been killed using ricin, and the cause has never been identified. The fear is that people can do this in their garage, and there are quite a number of cases over the years of extremists of all shades manufacturing ricin, mostly in quite impure form, but nevertheless ricin that was deadly enough to be used as a weapon.
Essam Eid's wife, Teresa Engel, also played a part in the criminal trial.
She told the court how she'd made the lethal poison ricin with Essam Eid at their home in the US before travelling over to Ireland, and she clearly told the jury that the reason was because he'd been directed to do something to kill the 3 Howard men by Sharon.
If ricin is ingested, what tends to happen first of all is vomiting, diarrhea. The blood pressure falls quite dramatically. People go into shock. You get massive organ failure. The liver, the kidneys, the spleen all fail, and death is slow and very painful, and requires 3 or 4 days typically before organ failure is so severe that the person dies.
Before Teresa Engel and Essam Eid travelled to Ireland, Teresa Engel was sent to Spain by Essam Eid, and she was to obtain a key for an apartment, PJ Howard's apartment, and this was with a view to organising the logistics behind how PJ would be suddenly pushed, in inverted commas, over the balcony of his 14th floor apartment. However, Teresa Engel she actually felt quite sick, and she got sick while she was in Spain. She just returned back to America. Essam Eid wasn't happy with that. Then Teresa Engel and a friend, Ashraf Garbia, travelled to Ireland in late August or early September in 2006, again to have a look around to see where the Howards spent their time. But again, they didn't go ahead with the plan, and it was after those 2 failed trips, both to Spain and to Ennis, that Essam Eid decided himself he would travel over to Ireland with Teresa Engel.
In some ways, Sharon Collins was extremely naive. I think the world and its mother would know if you were looking for a hitman that the internet and a search engine wouldn't be the first place to look. Everyone who got a chance to see the Hitman for Hire website would say that it looked totally like a spoof, that it could never have been taken seriously, and yet she was taken in by it. So she was an extremely gullible character. And yet parts of her were actually quite sophisticated, and she made very sure to cover her tracks. She had a certain degree of computer proficiency, and she was smart enough to know that her emails to Essam Eid would leave a trail. So she knew that she had to get rid of all of those computers, and in order to do that, she gave Essam Eid enough detail so that he could carry out a burglary at the Downs and Howard business premises to get rid of all the vital evidence.
Sharon was very worried about all the information that was on computers, so she wanted the computer in the Downs and Howard office, which was in Westgate Industrial Park on the Mill Road. She wanted rid of that, so she left a key and out for him under a brick at her son's house, and she also gave him the combination for the place, how to get in. And so when he got in there, he robbed the laptop and some other items. As a poker dealer, Eid was used to seeing luck flip in an instant and fortune change, and it probably made him very well equipped to double-cross the person who'd contracted him in the first place and to offer the Howards a chance to buy themselves out of the hit.
Sharon Collins thought she had done everything she needed to get these 3 killings carried out, but she didn't realise that Essam Eid was planning to double-cross her in spectacular fashion. On the night of September 26, 2006, Essam Eid began to change his plans. Up until this point, he had been doing exactly what Sharon Collins had asked of him, but at 10:30 p.m. that night, he began to put his own plan in motion. Essam Eid phoned Robert Howard and said to him that he had heard Robert had lost a few computers. Now, this would have piqued Robert's interest because the family business Downes and Howard had been the subject of a robbery on the previous evening and a laptop had been stolen from the premises. Eid told Robert that he would be at the house within 5 minutes. Now, Robert would have been intrigued by this, but he didn't contact the Gardaí and he could never have expected what might have happened next. About 5 minutes after the phone call, Essam Eid and his partner Teresa Engel arrived at Robert and Niall's house. Teresa stayed in the car while Eid went to the door. Robert would have been expecting the call, so he opened the door and Eid introduced himself as Tony. And he had in his possession a laptop, which Robert immediately recognised as the one that had been stolen from the Downes and Howard office on the previous evening. So he took the laptop from Eid, gave it to his brother Niall, who brought it inside and left it on the kitchen table. And while he was there, out of sight of Eid, he called the Gardaí and let them know what was happening. Essam Eid told Robert that he was a hired hitman who had been contracted to carry out hits on Robert, Niall and their dad, PJ. And to back up this extraordinary claim, he also produced a number of documents. And these had details of how to get to Robert and Niall's house in Ennis, how to get to their holiday home in Kilkee, and also directions to PJ's house over on the other side of Ennis. He also had several photographs of PJ, which proved that this wasn't just an idle threat, that he actually had all of the information he needed to carry out the hits. He said he had been paid €130,000 for the job, but that he wanted to reach an agreement with Robert so that he wouldn't have to carry out the hits. He suggested that Robert should pay him €100,000 and in return he would cancel the contracts on their lives. He handed over some photographs to Robert. Robert brought these inside, and while he was inside, he contacted Gardaí to make sure they were on their way. When Robert came back to the front door, Eid was heading back towards his car. Robert attempted to follow him, but he later told Gardaí he hadn't been able to identify the colour of the car or the licence plate. Later on that night, Eid rang again and he asked Robert had he made a start in collecting the €100,000. Robert lied to him and said that he had started working on it. The laptop that Eid had given Robert had been left on the kitchen table in their home, and Robert didn't touch it after that. It stayed there on the table until the following day when Gardaí collected it and tested it for fingerprints.
Robert was to meet with Essam Eid at the Queen's Hotel in Ennis.
He used Teresa as his bait on that occasion, and Teresa was sent to the hotel to collect this money. Now, as it happened, no money ever changed hands because Robert Howard had contacted Gardaí and the entire hotel was surrounded. So although Teresa Engel showed up to get the cash, she left empty-handed, and herself and Essam Eid were later arrested.
Sharon was arrested in June 2007 at the home she shared with PJ Howard, Ballybeg House on the Kildare Road in Ennis. And she was arrested and she was questioned by Gardaí, and she was brought to Kilkee where the district court was sitting that particular Tuesday, and there she was charged with conspiracy with Essam Eid to murder Robert and Niall Howard, and she was later charged with soliciting Essam Eid to kill the three Howards, and the charge of conspiracy to murder PJ Howard was later added. This story broke initially in 2007 when Sharon Collins was charged. Nobody in Ennis could believe that she was guilty of the charges that were brought against her, and people genuinely felt that she was the victim of a set-up. She was quite well known in Ennis, but people could not believe, and even as the trial went on day after day, people found it so difficult to believe that she could have been guilty.
Sharon Collins maintained her innocence until the very end, but she did admit to certain elements of the plot. She did say that she had written those things about PJ Howard, the details about his sexual indiscretions, but she said that she had never ever contacted any hitman or done anything to cause pain to any of her family.
So she came up with this person, Maria Marconi. She said one day when she was on the computer, a pop-up email came in asking her if she was interested in creative writing, and she got in touch with Maria Marconi, who became her writing mentor and who visited her and helped coach her in writing. And she said this is how Maria had access to her computers.
Sharon said that through the course of their friendship, she had revealed a lot of detail about her and PJ's lives and had confided in her about the so-called lewd behaviour that PJ Howard engaged in. And she claimed that Maria Marconi later contacted her to tell her that her laptop had been stolen and that the information from Sharon Collins' emails had been used by a third party to blackmail her, and that Sharon later felt, having been confronted by this mysterious blackmailer, that if she didn't pay up the money, that all of the things that she said about PJ Howard in her emails would be used against her.
And she said that was why she sent the money via FedEx, the 15,000 euro. This was why she'd sent it, to cancel this, rather than as a deposit for killing the three Howards.
Because Essam Eid had sent her photographs of himself in a flash yellow sports car, she tried to maintain that Maria Marconi was somehow linked with Essam Eid because she also drove a flash yellow sports car and lived in Las Vegas.
The Gardaí and the FBI tried to track down this Maria Marconi, and indeed Collins' own legal team tried to track down Marconi in the US, but no trace of her was ever found. So the prosecution concluded that she was nothing more than a figment of Collins' imagination.
Sharon Collins, despite all of her internet contact with Essam Eid, had never actually met the man that she hired to carry out the hits.
Essam Eid was sitting in the courtroom. Sharon Collins was brought in. She was charged at the time with conspiracy to murder Robert and Niall Howard. She'd later be charged with conspiracy to murder PJ Howard. That was the very first time they met. In that tiny courtroom over in Kilkee, Essam Eid sat down. He was flanked by two Gardaí or prison officers and winked and said, "I was cheated."
Sharon Collins claimed she had never set up the Lying Eyes email address, and when her case came to court, she was questioned by the prosecution barrister Unani Rafferty, who said to her that, you know, it was Lying Eyes was obviously the name of the famous Eagles song, and she pointed out to Sharon Collins, she said, this is a very well-known song. This is a song about a young, beautiful woman who marries an older man and who then cheats on him. Surely, Mrs. Collins, you know what this song is about. And Sharon Collins, even though she was backed into a corner, still wouldn't admit it, and she said, you know, I actually only know the first verse of that song and I'm more into Justin Timberlake myself.
During the trial, Essam Eid's legal team always maintained that he was a con man and nothing more than a fraudster. However, the manufacture of the rice and poison at his home in the US and its transportation over to Ireland would suggest otherwise.
Essam Eid did appear to be a very bumbling, inept criminal who had nothing more on his mind than extorting money from these various people who had been targeted. But the fact that Gardaí were able to find ricin poisoning in his contact lens case suggested that if push came to shove, he was actually prepared to carry out the killings. He might have been an idiot, but he was also a dangerous idiot.
I don't think there's any doubt but that Eid would have carried out those hits. I mean, he was brazen enough to go up to the door and tell those men face to face what he was about to do. Nothing was going to stop him getting his hands on that cash.
In one of the more bizarre moments of this incredibly bizarre case, Teresa Engel told everyone in court how they had smashed up the castor beans, mixed them with acetone and something else that she couldn't quite remember, and had put them through a sieve and waited for the mixture to dry out into a powder. Now, this powder was eventually put into Essam Eid's contact lens case and brought over to Ireland. And it remained unnoticed even after Essam Eid was arrested and taken off to prison. And it wasn't until FBI agents who were investigating the parallel extortion attempt that had gone on in the United States, when they discovered a little bit of detail about that, they began to panic and realised that there was a potential that Essam Eid had planned to use ricin in Ireland. So the FBI contacted the Gardaí here, and on foot of that, Gardaí brought special agents over to the prison. They checked Essam Eid's cell, carried out a detailed search, found his contact lens case, and when it showed up traces of ricin poisoning, it was then packed off to a laboratory for further testing, and the test confirmed that there was poison in the case.
Sharon didn't react with any surprise when PJ walked across the courtroom and kissed her. Everyone else in the court was very surprised. She wasn't. It was almost as if it had been set up between them and it had been agreed. And as a matter of fact, she mouthed thank you to him after he'd given evidence.
The case itself really was compelling and was one of the major talking points in the trial. He'd said so much on her behalf despite all the allegations that were made against her, and there he was showing his actions. He didn't appear for the remainder of the trial. However, at the sentencing hearing, PJ Howard spoke out in her favour and asked the judge not to jail her, and said that they could take up their life again together as they had enjoyed so much good times together. And he said he just did not believe the allegations. He believed that she was the victim of an elaborate scam.
Nobody remembered anything like it. It just was unprecedented. It was unbelievable that somebody who could very easily have not been in court because he'd been dead, somebody who was lucky enough to survive this evil plot, should actually believe the most bizarre story that a criminal court has ever heard.
A Clare woman has been found guilty of soliciting a man to kill her former partner and conspiracy to murder. 45-year-old Sharon Collins of Kildysart in Ennis was found guilty of trying to hire Las Vegas-based Essam Eid to kill PJ Howard and his two sons. They also found Eid guilty of attempting to extort money with menace.
Sharon Collins was eventually found guilty of conspiracy to murder PJ Robert and Niall Howard, and also of soliciting Essam Eid for the purposes of murdering the three men.
It was a very unusual situation in court because the jury were drip feeding the results back, so there was a lot of confusion as to what she'd been found guilty of and what he'd been found guilty of. But she was absolutely distraught at the result, and as were her sons. One of them looked like he was about to collapse.
The jury of 8 men and 4 women found Essam Eid guilty of trying to extort €100,000 from Robert Howard to cancel the contracts. He was also found guilty of handling stolen goods, but the jury was unable to agree on a verdict for the conspiracy to murder charges, so Mr Justice Roderick Murphy discharged them.
The DPP must now decide whether or not to order a retrial for the conspiracy to murder charges against Essam Eid. In the meantime, he returns to jail to be sentenced along with Sharon Collins in October. Diane Connor, TV3 News at the Central Criminal Court.
Now, as it happened, her conviction for conspiracy was later overturned because the jury could not agree that Essam Eid had been guilty of conspiracy. And on the basis that you would need 2 people to conspire to carry out murders, she eventually managed to get those convictions overturned. But her conviction for soliciting a man to kill still stands, and she was convicted on 3 charges in relation to the 3 men.
Good evening. A woman convicted of conspiring to murder her partner and his 2 sons has been sentenced to 6 years in jail.
So too has the hitman Sharon Collins tried to hire.
This case was every journalist's dream. Not only did it have the glamour factor of the FBI involvement and FBI agents testifying in court, it also had very sinister elements that you wouldn't normally find in an Irish courtroom, such as the recipe for ricin. There were details of sordid sex acts. There was a Las Vegas poker dealer masquerading as a professional hitman. It really was quite intriguing. There was an element of glamour to it all. And as Essam Eid's defence barrister pointed out, it was the type of plot that you might think worthy of the Coen brothers. There were so many incredible angles to this case that it was no surprise that it eventually spawned 2 books, and the rights to it have also been sold, so we may yet see the story of Sharon Collins up on the big screen.